everyone, and welcome to this week's episode. As you're aware, we're doing a wee series on farm succession, and each week we are having an expert or someone who has gone through the experience themselves to talk all about it. And this week we have the fabulous Jacqui Owen who is a lawyer and so has her eyes over that side of it. And she has come to chat to us about what she's seen in her experiences. So Jacqui, do you want to give a little bit of an intro of who you are personally as well as in your career?
Okay, so I am obviously a lawyer. I own my own practice. I have 8 staff. We've got offices in Morrinsville and Matamata in Waikato. I've got 2 children who are 18 and 16. And in my second life, when I am not busy lawyering, I'm actually a farmer in my own right. So we were contract milking, then 50-50 share milking. We sold our herd 4 years ago and we went into a equity partnership with our old contract milking boss on a 70 hectare dry stock farm. So the company owns that, and then and that's in an equity partnership agreement, and then Sam and I in our partnership then lease that off the equity partnership, and we run 280 dairy heifer grazers, and then Sam teaches full-time as an ag teacher at the local college, and I do my lawyering, and the farm sort of just happens early mornings and late nights and weekends. So I guess for me, the good thing about that is that I get to, I'm pretty passionate about the ag sector. For me, I think it is still a valid career and an it has future, it has real future, and we need good people coming through all the time. And there's been a lot of reports, I guess, that have probably prompted this around the fact that our succession planning to make sure that those good people are coming through has been really badly managed over the last probably 15 years. And that's going to leave this bit of a dearth that we really, as mid-40-year-olds, have a real responsibility to make sure that we're really getting onto that and getting that sorted. And so I guess for me, what that means is that the people that are my age and are looking at ag coming in at the same time have to look about how we're actually getting out. We're looking at it in both angles, and we'll be really, really clear about the fact that at the same time as we're looking in, we should be looking at how we're going to exit and what that looks like, because our parents in particular, or our landowners that we currently have left that exit strategy way too late. And it's going to create a real problem in our industry that we need to fix if we want the industry to keep growing and keep doing well.
That's really interesting. That makes it really relatable to those of us who don't have family farms, but aim to buy them and to start our own family farm legacy. Yeah, it's a really good reminder that as we go into it wide open with a whole plan in place, or at least some kind of idea of what's going to happen and discussions being had.
I found that real interesting, Vanwe, just in that, from my end, we don't have family farms either. So my husband's from Wales, like you, and he came over here, didn't really know what he wanted to do for a job, and went into dairy farming. My dad's a butcher, we weren't off farming families. So sometimes when people talk about succession planning, they are very, very desperately focused in intergenerational change. But succession planning, actually, I often work with people where it is existing share milkers or existing contract milkers looking to get into a farming business that is not family related, because the children of their farm owners actually have no interest in the ag industry at all. So, succession planning is about the business. It's not necessarily about intergenerational change.
I think that's so interesting, and you termed it exit strategy, because I guess often we think about these intergenerational families and large family farms and that being hard. But actually, at the end of the day, if you own a farm, you have a large capital asset that something needs to happen to it. Whether you hand that down, purchase out from another generation, whether you sell it off or you do nothing and pass away, someone then has to pick the pieces up and deal with it. It's a huge capital asset that regardless of whether you do something or don't do something, something has to happen to it.
Absolutely. And I guess when you're thinking about it, when we're thinking about it, we do a couple of things. So the first thing is we always try to have a really close relationship with whoever the landowner's accountant is. right? Like, it's really important that the very first meeting has the landowner, no children or share milkers or whoever the incoming people are, just the landowner, their accountant, their bank manager, their lawyer, right? And the purpose of those first initial meetings is like, are the two landowners or three landowners or whatever that might look like actually aligned in what they think? Because they need to have a joint vision or an agreed vision about what they want as their end result before you can start doing any of the other stuff about bringing other people in. Yes.
So true. You're taking such a. The reason I'm like, can't get my words out is it's a fresh perspective, and I feel like we are doing a series of these interviews at the moment, and it's like layering my knowledge more and more and more from something that was probably not ground zero, but pretty close to ground zero. And the brain is ticking around this because, like you say, it's just not happening. Do you have any insight as to why people aren't having these conversations, or they're not doing succession plan, business planning, whatever you term it, why this isn't happening and it's been done poorly? Any ideas or insights?
I like, you know, it's anecdotal stuff, right? It's what I've seen. So I've been out on my own now since 2017. So we're coming out of just 8 years, 8 and a bit years.
Wow, that's gone quick.
I know, right? It has. You're right.
Well done. Congratulations.
And prior to that, I've been working in rural firms for quite a bit of time before then, and I've been farming. I think Sam and I celebrate our 20th wedding anniversary shortly. So for the best part of 25 years, we've been in the farming sector.
Aww.
So what I see is there is a generation in particular of people that are 60 plus who were brought up that you don't have financial conversations with your children, that it's none of their business until you die. And when you own small amounts that you were splitting between 7 children, which is what their parents were doing, right? We had much larger families. We had maybe a 100-acre block. Was either the person that was on there was always just going to buy out the others, and they were all going to get 30 grand each or 40 grand each. Now we have big land holdings worth multi-million dollars with often only 2 or 3 children that is supposed to be split between, right? So actually it is a business decision that we're talking about. And when we've locked out our younger generation from being involved in that business decision, that's a mindset thing, right? That's a real generational attitude of it's none of their business till I die. And it's okay to have that opinion, but if you have that opinion, you can't then be annoyed if your children have gone off and made their own lives and they actually don't want your family farm anymore. They want the money from it because they were never part of let's build a business together. So they've been told to stand on their own 2 feet. They've done that. That business then doesn't fit into their thinking because they weren't involved in that.
That's a really interesting way of looking at it, isn't it, Emily? I feel like you're really stretching our minds here, Jacqui, today, because just perceptions of what should and shouldn't happen. And yeah, it's right. Why on earth should a kid who you've pushed out of the business for years suddenly come back and carry on your couple of 100-year, I don't know how, a couple of 100 years in New Zealand, but, you know, a 100-year century farm? Why should they stay if they've always felt like they're on the out? They've got no emotional attachment to it. Yeah, and that's really interesting.
If they've gone and made a successful living somewhere else, they will have come accustomed to a life that's probably not in the back blocks with limited services. We had a great conversation about terrible internet before we jumped on, and I bet you if they're living in town with some good internet and a good business, yeah, it would be a massive lifestyle change. I've done it to move rurally and to then, you know, change what you're doing and even to learn some of the new skills. Like yourself, Jacqui, if they were a lawyer in town and then all of a sudden, you know, 3/4 of the way or 2/3 of the way through a career, they all of a sudden come back to a farm, their skills aren't necessarily transferable if they haven't been doing it like you have along the way on the side. So it's just, yeah, really fascinating when you put it in those like quite basic terms, how that actually plays out. And I suppose you talked about the generation before, either smaller land holdings with more children. I think as well, probably what we've seen down here was there was a certain sibling that potentially from birth, their destiny was to own the farm, and they they didn't get the choice of what they wanted to do. That was what they wanted to do, and everyone else got the choice and left and went and did stuff. So I suppose that was how the bigger land holdings were probably dealt with, whereas now we really try, what is the saying? Fear not equal, to make this work, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And I guess once you've got that right, so we get to this point where we go, cool, I've got this kid, right? I've got a family of 4. I've got one kid that's working on the family farm all the time, right? Now, often the other 3 children will think, man, they've got it so easy. They're going to get the family farm. They're going to inherit all this wealth, blah, 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 blah.
They should probably do a day's work on the farm, and then they do not have it easy at all.
Often those people have worked for well under market rate. Their partner has been expected to live in a home that they have no say over, what the walls can be painted, what the carpet looks like, all of those sorts of things, right? So often there have been quite a few sacrifices that come along with that. Equally, yes, they get presumably, a house to live in where other people have had to pay mortgages and rent and things like that. So there is an even up there of perspective, I guess, where people think they've been harder done by than others. But once you've worked out, okay, we've only got one kid that's really interested in this farm, and they ideally want to have this farm, but we have 4 kids and we've built up wealth that we want equally or fairly distributed. There are some real easy ways, if you start early enough, of ensuring that the person who has the tie to that land and is working in that business gets to keep that, but the others still get to be treated equally and fairly. And probably the best structures that we see effectively have 2 entities involved, right? So we get to a point that we start early on where there is one company set up that owns the business assets, the trading, actual farming assets. So it will own the stock, the tractors, it'll own the shares, it'll own any other machinery, it will, all of those sorts of things. And then you have another company that has a landowning shareholding, right? And while mum and dad are alive, in general, you will try to keep them still owning the majority of those shares, which might be 51%. Any of your children are given the ability to buy into the landowning shareholding, but only people who are physically working in the business are entitled to own shares in the trading or working company. Because then if there is a falling out, that person or children or 2 siblings, if it is, have the ability to uplift their business off that land and carry on making their living on somebody else's property and doing that without losing or being answerable to non-farmers. I think that's really important, that we separate out the land owning to the business. And once you do that, the ones that have the stock, etc., are building up an asset over here, which is good for them because it gives them borrowing capacity to buy out their siblings later. But it allows for somebody who might not be necessarily a hands-on farmer, but actually still does have a real emotional tie to the land, to keep their interest in the land. That's the best.
Sounds like a really great
system. You can
system.
get people to that point. That's a great structure.
It's hard work. Yeah.
It is hard work, and it requires, I'd say, the best part of 2 years planning, at least.
It's such a long runway, isn't it? And I think these things layer on top of each other, like you said before. We're not having the conversations, and then these conversations are taking such a long time with a whole lot of different people and changes of mindset and all that sort of stuff, that it's a bit of a compounding snowball that's going forward. So what about if you don't have family interested in the farm, or you don't have children and you own an asset? Obviously there's an easy way, I guess, of just complete sale, but it's not always that easy either, is it?
No, it's not. But I guess, right, let's take out that it's a kid that's on there. That same structure works if that's a share milker that you've had on there for 10 years, or a nephew, or somebody that you've just seen coming through the industry that you're like, I want to help them. Like in general, farmers want to help other farmers. They want to see farming succeed. They believe in the ag industry, and they want to see good people be able to do it. And the reality is, and I'll probably shoot myself in the foot a little bit here with some of the powers that be, Banking is not set up to help people get into farming. The finance required is just, it's prohibitive. To be fair, I believe it's completely unjustified and unfair with some of the requirements. I know, like when we first bought our herd, which was a long time ago, we had to have, say, 15% deposit. Then when we went to go up in numbers, I said, oh, you've got to have 20% deposit. And then when we went to go up in numbers again, it was, oh, you've got to have 30% deposit. I've got young fellas now and ladies now going share milking, and they're required to have 50% of the value of their herd in cash. Now, that's mental to me when I've also got clients that have town jobs where they could be made redundant or fired tomorrow, and they're borrowing 90% of $1 million house that doesn't earn an income, that they're not tied to in any way. It's just a house that might drop in value, and they have been dropping in value substantially. The bank's quite happy to just lend them that money, but the young people who are getting out there at 4 o'clock in the morning in the rain and the sleet are expected to somehow have, you're wanting to buy a herd, your first herd's these days a minimum of 300 cows, right, realistically. So we're talking an investment of probably upwards of 600,000. And we're expected to have 300,000 of that in cash. And we can't use our KiwiSaver to do that. We can't, none of that's fair. That whole system is geared to stop young people getting into their succession planning and starting the journey.
I couldn't agree more. We've discussed in depth the banking review on the podcast at different times, but equally in personal experience, the financial requirements of purchasing farm stock, land, if you just put the word rural in front of it and go to the bank, are outrageous. And it's really tough because we have actually ended up having to invest in residential property, which at the get-go wasn't where the skill set lay. And so it's taken a lot of trial and error and mistakes and things that cost a lot of money that have, whereas if we'd invested in stock, we potentially would have had more skills in the game, maybe made fewer mistakes or had more people to give us advice or something along the way. But that issue with the banks is, like you said, quite outrageous, hard to believe, particularly when they are actually key stakeholders in this whole mess, because a lot of these people leaving farming in whatever way that is, they still have debt with these banks, and their business is essentially taking on debt, which they want young farmers to take on debt because then they'll pay them interest and all the rest of it, and the cycle keeps going around. So it's actually, like you say, crazy to think of how much cash farmers, young farmers are expected to have sitting in their bank, meanwhile working outrageous amounts. So they don't have a lot of time to go start a side hustle. They're not close to anything that they could pick up a second job or all those sorts of things. And I totally agree with you.
So often, with families, that's easy because mum and dad just say, well, cool, we'll guarantee that'll work. But actually that same system can work for non-family. So in my job, what we call that is vendor financing. And so essentially, and I see heaps of this, the farm owner becomes the bank, and they are either in a position, depending on how much debt they have with the bank or what their needs, right? So sometimes all that the existing landowner wants is enough money so that they can either buy something off farm to live in themselves, or they want enough money so that they can give their kids some ready cash out of that business so that they can carry on with whatever it is that their life and business and everything like that is. And then the rest they're quite happy to finance. So what you'll see is that portion, let's say it's a $5 million farm, it wouldn't be uncommon where the person coming in who is not family already owns a herd or already owns plenty of machinery. They might have, by the time they get to there, maybe $700,000-800,000 of readily available asset or cash that they can sort of sell and put some into that. Then the remaining $4.2 million might be $3 million financed through the bank and the rest financed by way of a vendor loan that comes behind the bank, right? So that can all happen. There's lots of paperwork involved in that. That is why you have to have lawyers and accountants. It's really annoying for people. They hate that part of it. But if it is done properly, the bank are happy, the vendor or the farm owner or the landowner is actually in a very safe and secure position. And the person coming in is secure because it's normally worded, hey, even if this person dies in the first 5 years, the estate can't call this in, right? I have to have a minimum period of time to prove to the bank I can actually service all of this debt.
So just to be clear, Jacqui, and I think this is what you're saying. For example, the bank's asking for 50% loan value ratio, so 50% cash up front. What you're saying is the incoming farmer might have 20% or whatever it is. The vendor loan is that other 30%, and then the vendor and the incoming farmer are coming together to get that 50%, and then the bank's loaning the other 50%, which is paid to the existing landowner to go and do whatever they need to do on their merry way.
100%. Yep, absolutely 100%. And that might be by loan, or it might be in an equity partnership, right? Which is essentially where Sam and I are at, okay? We said, hey, we're getting out of dairy farming as such. Like, we just decided that we were ready for a change, and we couldn't see ourselves being able to afford a dairy farm in the Waikato, and my business is based in the Waikato, right? So we were kind of a bit stuck here. The kids were at college. Our lives were kind of stuck in this area, and this wasn't where we would be able to afford to buy a dairy farm. So we put the herd on the market. An old boss of ours heard we'd put the herd on the market and said, well, hey, would you be interested in a dry stock block? So then we were like, yeah, but we can't afford, to do all of this. And he said, that's cool. You sell your herd, you do this, we'll talk to the bank. And essentially, we own 50% of the shares in the company that owns that land. He owns 50% of the shares. We put what cash we had in, and then we took out a loan that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to get, but because he had other land holdings and other assets, the bank are happy that he guarantors our debt. So he hasn't had to come up with extra cash, but he does have, if we went bankrupt or we skipped the country, he's going to be liable for that. So it's got to be well documented. It's got to be with people that you trust implicitly. It's got to be with people you can have some pretty straight up and hard conversations around. Like, hey, this is the expectation, or I don't think you're managing things the way I need you to. That sort of stuff. But I think there are so many landowners that don't know that's an option.
Yeah.
So they get to their 60s or even 70s, and I don't want to sell the farm, but my kids aren't interested. And no one has said to them, so don't sell it to your kids. Sell it to someone who's passionate about the industry and is going to keep this a farm and not put it into subdivisions and not put it into trees. And, you can do that. You can still do that. You can still have an interest in the business. You can stay a shareholder, but you just are selling some of that. You can have some freed up cash to help your kids or your grandkids do their dream, which might not be your dream, being a farmer.
So where do people start with these kind of negotiations? Like, obviously it was a bit of word of mouth, and I expect that probably a lot of it is word of mouth, but should people be having open and honest and vulnerable conversations with people like yourself, like their lawyers and their accountants on both parties? Like, because they've obviously got reasonable sized books of clients and know what people are thinking to a certain extent.
Good lawyers and good accountants should be front-footing that, right? We know our clients and we know where they're at and we know how old they are. So the good lawyers and the good accountants make an effort to regularly catch up with their clients and then go, hey, what's your plan? Like, what does it look like for you in 10 years, 5 years, 2 years? Like, what is it that you actually want? Have you actually thought about it? And that's actually no different to law firms or accounting practices or plumbers or builders. Like, it doesn't matter what the business is. Everybody needs to know what that looks like. Otherwise, what happens is that you end up thinking, cool, I'm going to retire and sell this business for $1 million, but actually the older you get, the less that value is probably going to be, to be honest, particularly when you're in businesses. So, the starting point is that, you should, if your lawyers and accountants haven't asked you that question, then you should be asking them. But as people who want to come in, you should be surrounding yourselves with bank managers and accountants and lawyers that are putting you in touch with people that are at that scale too, right? Like you should be putting yourself out there, going to whatever it might be, like your discussion groups or your Dairy NZ lunch or your rural support barbecue, and just being like, I'd really like to buy in. I'm looking for an equity partnership opportunity with somebody who wants to exit out of the industry, right? And someone will know someone.
Yeah. Because I think, like you say, it's quite a vulnerable place to put yourself in to even say this is what we want, isn't it? Because I think a lot of us are still raised with the don't talk about finance, you know, that sort of thing. But you do actually have to be quite bold, particularly when it's not family or you're talking about equity partnerships, and then even them prepared for like a reasonable runway in terms of, are we values aligned? Are we, you know, on the same page? Like what you said, what's our exit strategy, or how does that all work? And then finding the piece of land, if it's a new piece of land, to work together.
Yeah, 100%. Like, it is scary, and they are really scary conversations, but often, you know, I do a little bit of talks around this stuff with Smash and Dairy NZ and stuff, and I often say to people, you're in business, like you have to put your big boy and big girl pants on sometimes and just put yourself out there. Like, otherwise, being successful in business requires you to be willing to take risk. So sometimes that first risk is being able to say, this is what I want. This is where my end goal is.
Very true. And I think sometimes it's doing the sort of trying not, you don't want to be too big for your boots, you don't want to be not humble. And so I think sometimes that stops you from doing that.
And it's a super
like you say,
Kiwi
taking
thing.
the risk. Yeah.
Yep, that's a super Kiwi thing, right? And this is why we see actually the Myfanwy's and the Alan Collinsons, you know, like I've got a lot of clients and a lot of mates who've come over from the UK and they don't have that whole I can't ask for help or I can't tell people what I want situation. Kiwis go, God, I can't tell people that's what I want. That'd be terrible if people knew I had a goal. God. No, shit, no, that we can't be doing that, right? Like, so that's a real Kiwi attitude of, yeah. And I think those things are improving. People are willing to have better conversations because it's out there, right? Like people like you guys have these conversations and they say, well, we need to talk about it. And the research shows we need to talk about it. We've got a big problem in this country. Yeah, yeah. Because the reality is this country's super reliant on primary industry.
So just before we wrap it up, obviously you said people, we've kind of talked about this, but I'm going to question we're asking all these things. So the research is showing that we're not starting early enough. And you've said yourself, these conversations are taking a long period of time. So we're asking everyone in this series, what would your advice be to people that need to get started in having these discussions about farm succession?
Okay, so if let's say you're the landowner, then you sit down with your significant other or the other landowner and you write down your 5 bullet points that are the most important end results for you. What matters to you about where you want to be? What is your goals for travel, for where you're going to end up living, for who you'd like to see coming into that farm? Because you guys need to have a conversation first around that lining up. For the people going in and you're going in with somebody else, that same thing needs to happen. That is the starting point. The starting point is making sure that you and the person that you're committing to this with have got a real clear idea of where you see the end and what your negotiables are and what your non-negotiables are. And then when you find the right person that you're going to go in with, you share that with them. And then you see how your list and their list compare. Right? So you start off with maybe 4 lists, you combine those down to 2 lists, you combine that down to 1 list. Once you've got that part right, then the rest kind of is process. It's just about getting the process right. Knowing what you want is the most important thing. And most people just don't, they just say, people can deal with that when I'm dead.
That's so practical. Love that. And it's something that everyone can think of and do sort of now, regardless of where they are in the journey. Just off the side of that, a question just popped into my head. If you are a young family and you've just kind of taken over a farming business, or you're just getting into one, or, you know, you've been there for a couple of years, but your kids are still late primary, early high school or something, so you don't really know what they're going to do, how that's going to turn out. Are you too early to be starting to think about your business exit strategy? And how can you keep that open enough and flexible enough to move over time? Just on that same kind of point of like those bullet points.
Right? So like we've talked about, hey, make your 5 bullet points about what your end goal is, about how you're getting into this. But then while you're doing that, you also want to write the same 5 bullet points as that landowner's done about what matters to me when I exit, right? Like, what things matter to me? Does it matter to me that I have security to be able to stay living in my own home for as long as possible and I can afford in-home care? Or does it matter to me more that I can afford to go and pay to live in a residential care facility that I choose to? Or does it matter to me that this land stays in with my family, available for my grandchildren and all of them to come back to, even if they don't want to farm it? Like, what is it that's in your core values first? Because just because you might say, oh, I want my kids to come back onto the farm. But actually what that might evolve into is, cool, my kids aren't hands-on farmers, but they are farm consultants. And so, cool, I'm happy that they want to own the land, but they're quite happy to have good quality staff or share milkers or other equity partners involved as well. Just the values won't change.
Yeah, right. Interesting.
Yeah.
No, I think that's really practical, which is great. So, just to summarize, 5 bullet points of where you want to be when you are exiting, and then those are things that you can share with equity partners or other parties that are coming in to make sure that you're aligned on what you're trying to achieve at the outset.
Yep, that's the first thing. And then the second thing is surround yourself with a team of professionals that you trust and can talk openly with, right? So pick an accountant you love, pick a lawyer you love, pick a bank manager you like working with, pick a farm consultant that you're happy with. Like, all of those things matter. And then tell your children or your share milker or whoever that person is coming in to go and find their own. That's not your people, right?
I feel like that's critical, hey? Everyone goes, no, mum's got an accountant, cool, I'll just go use that same one.
And when I say a different accountant, I'm not saying it has to be a different firm, right? Like, for example, for us, we have one firm that acts for the 2 equity partners and acts for the partnership, but we've got different partners within that firm that are our accountant. So it's not necessarily going to a completely different firm if they've got that ability. What it is having somebody else that's got the same level of decision-making capability in the firm. That's actually really, really important, because you want different lenses on things. So it is critical that people have their own teams around them that are not just the same people mum and dad use, because you don't get enough of a lens on it otherwise.
Really, like, you're giving so much practical advice. I really like that. And it also means, I guess, when you're in the meeting, that person's not switching their hats constantly into whose best interest they're representing in that conversation and getting muddled.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. You know, I can't give mum and dad the best advice and the kids the best advice. I can give them a settlement in the middle, but actually that's not my job. My job is to say, here are the options, here are the risks of each of those options to you guys. Here's all the information on that. It's up to you guys to pick which one of those options you want. Then it's my job to implement it.
Such good. Yeah, love that. 2 pieces of really practical advice to wrap us up, Jacqui. Is there anything else that you feel like that we didn't ask or you didn't get a chance to share that's really important?
I just want people to have a conversation. Like, you know, ag still has a future. The country is completely reliant on our primary industry to do well. But also we've got really talented young people that still want to be outdoors and farming and doing great things. And, you know, like, I mean, I'm getting to that point where I'm at the other end, you know, like, we're getting to the mid-40s. We want 20-year-olds and 18-year-olds coming in and seeing a future in farming. It won't happen if we're not having these conversations.
Thank you, Jacqui. Really appreciate your time today and for giving us those practical insights. Do you want to just let us know what your practice name is if anyone thinks that you're the cut of their jib and they want to give you a call?
Yeah, cool. It's really original. Jacqui Owen Legal. And so you can pretty much just Google that and you can find us.
Perfect. Awesome. Thanks so much for your time today, Jacqui. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Emily.